We will start today's meeting. So again, welcome. Today, we are being honored with DGI, the Division of Geographic Information, and the Kentucky 911 Service Board. We're going to hear from a couple of their projects, KyFromAbove, the role of GIS in Kentucky's COVID-19 response, KRS-1 and the Kentucky State Plane Coordinate System, and the role of GIS with Next Gen 911. So we've got a lot of good topics that we're going to cover. Hopefully we'll stay between that 2 and 4 time period. We know your time is valuable. We want to make sure that we get you in and out. But with that, I will pass it over to Kent. And Kent, I don't know how you want your team to handle this. If you want questions to be held until the end of each presentation, we can go that way and we can just filter things through the chat, but I'll let you decide that.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. This, from a virtual perspective, that's probably the best way to handle it.
Yes.
I normally like to be more interactive, but I know sometimes it can be difficult when you're a little disconnected like this. So with that being said, I appreciate the introduction. For just the sake of flow, what we're going to do is I'm going to cover all of the DGI specific stuff first, and then I'm going to turn it over to Brian Bunch, let him talk about the changes to KRS-1, the Kentucky State Plane Coordinate System, and the upcoming changes to the associated regulations. And then I want to turn it over to Mike Sunseri, the Executive Director of the Kentucky 911 Services Board, and David Lucas with Mission Critical Partners. And those guys can do their little pitches. I think everybody's going to be interested in what these folks have to say. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. And I think we should be good to go if folks are seeing it on that end.
We are good.
All right. Well, the first thing I want to do, Ryan invited us to speak at this particular meeting, and it's been a long time since we've done any sort of overview in terms of what DGI really is and why we exist and things of that sort. So I want to step through that pretty quick to kind of start things out. Just so you know, we are situated within the Commonwealth of Office of Technology. We're within the Office of IT Governance Architecture. We just went through a reorganization just literally a few weeks ago, and that is the name of the office that we're currently within. We're now a division again. We were a branch, but now we're a division as a result of this latest reorg. So if you go look at KRS 42650, and I encourage everybody to do this, you ought to know how to find these statutes. This is important that you take a look at this stuff. But look at 42650 and 42630, and really what you'll see there is who we are and what we do. And those are kind of our marching orders. We just didn't dream up that, hey, we're going to do this or do that. It's written in statute. We're doing what we're supposed to do. And one of those things is maintain a central statewide clearinghouse, which is the GeoNet. Public facing is the GeoNet. We do coordinate multi-agency GIS projects like KyFromAbove. We create and update GIS standards, and those are blessed through the Geographic Information Advisory Council. And we provide centralized GIS services to the executive branch within state government, offer technical assistance and guidance to the Kentucky GIS community as a whole, and promote collaboration and data sharing. And once again, if you go look at those statutes, you'll kind of see that those are our marching orders. This is what we're here to do. We are nationally recognized for our enterprise GIS and data sharing, and I participate with a lot of my peers in a few different groups And it's interesting how Kentucky kind of rises to the top when it comes to those two particular things, enterprise GIS and data sharing. And as I think everybody knows, we've got a really rich history when it comes to data sharing. We do have several hundred layers in the central repository at this point. All of our executive branch agencies have access. The thing that I want to point out here is that this data is fed and updated by agency business processes. So, you know, it may be something that changes on an as-needed basis, like when Fish and Wildlife buys new property and expands a wildlife management area. You know, that change is made at their end and then rolled into a staging area, and then the entire master data set is updated so everybody sees that. So, you know, it's become a part, just a routine part of regular business within these cabinets to create this data and keep it updated and feed the repository. If you want to get your data into the master clearinghouse, you have to have a metadata record. And that's kind of our gatekeeper role there. We want to make sure these things are documented. It's a minimum set, half hour, 45 minutes max to fill out the metadata. Once that's done, then we'll allow it into the repository. The fact that we provide direct access across our wide area network significantly decreases duplicative spending on storage. You know, 25, 30 years ago, we all had to have this data local because the network was slow and things like that. But with the robust wide area network we have in state government, this allows us to put all of our data in one place. And then those agencies aren't nickel and dime to death with little charges, well, actually with big charges for storage. And then what we've learned here, and I think the key is, you know, cross-agency sharing and collaboration. That's why we've been successful, is we share this data that's built within these business processes, and we collaborate at a very high level across state government. And I think that's made us very successful over the years. Funding. We've heard a variety of things from people, and people have a variety of ideas about how we are funded. And this is something that gets brought up from time to time, but we are funded via what's called an enterprise assessment. And so the amount contributed by executive branch cabinet is weighted by the size of that cabinet or the number of employees, let's say. So the largest cabinets with the most employees tend to pay the largest share of supporting our efforts. And so, you know, Cabinet for Health and Family Services is a very large cabinet. Transportation cabinet is a very large cabinet, whereas tourism, arts, and heritage is relatively small. And so, you know, if you had a pie chart out there, you would see that it was kind of broken down by the number of employees in each executive branch cabinet. We do not have a line item in the state budget. And as a matter of fact, we have no mechanism at this point to really even ask for one, okay? The Commonwealth Office of Technology as a whole is funded via an enterprise assessment, and they charge agencies for services that are offered. We don't really directly charge the agencies for services we offer. From a GIS perspective, we just get a little piece of that pie through the enterprise assessment. We were able to get, and it's been quite some time, some capital funds. And in the 2000s, we got quite a bit for different projects, mainly for base map stuff. But we haven't gotten any capital funds since 2010. And all of those capital funds were expended on KyFromAbove by the 2014 KyFromAbove acquisition period. So between 2010 and 2014, I think we had close to $500,000. All of those were drawn down and put directly into KyFromAbove, into the data, not into paying for our time or our services or anything like that. We have never charged a penny or an administrative fee for anything associated with KyFromAbove. And also, this is a myth, I think, out there, is that We don't sell data of any sort to anybody, not to the private sector, the public sector. You know, Google's not writing us a check. USGS doesn't pay us for what we get. They may contribute to it, but they're paying the same amount that anybody else that uses the KyFromAbove purchasing mechanism would use. So we do not make any money off selling data, and never have. Our assets. At this point, there's several hundred vector-based layers, and some of these are federal. Most of them are state, and some of them are local. Dozens of raster-based layers that are out there, and some of those are cached, and some of those are dynamic. All of our vector data is stored in ArcSDE, and if you're in the executive branch and have access via the wide area network, you literally just drag and drop your layer file into your map, and it connects you to the data. And this is a somewhat little known fact that I think a lot of people, more people should take advantage of, but everything in our KY vector database, everything is pushed out on a quarterly basis to an archive file and published to the KY GeoNet as a file geodatabase. So, you know, you think about that. Everything in our enterprise is pushed out there for anybody to have access to. And sure, you could go to the GeoNet and you could download a lot of these things one by one by one. But if you're consistent and going and getting it from the GeoNet at the end of each quarter, you've got access to that data, and it's seamless statewide. If you were a small community just getting started in GIS, or you were a consultant coming in from out of state and you had a project here in the Commonwealth, just being able to go and grab that is a huge win. So if you're not aware of that and you've got any questions about it, you know, please let us know. We use Image Server, Esri's Image Server, to manage our raster data. Once again, that's all stored in single zone and accessed via layer files. And then, of course, the public, the people that aren't in the executive branch, can get to this stuff via the Geo portal and the Open Data portal, or directly to the REST endpoints. And all of these public-facing map and image services, whether they're dynamic or cached, are literally out there and discoverable either via the REST endpoint, or they've been published to the Geo portal and to the Open Data portal. We also, and this is just about a year old now, we have implemented Portal for ArcGIS, or ArcGIS Enterprise, within the executive branch, and integrated it with our Active Directory so that everybody just uses their regular login to get into that. And this has been a big hit. We did a little annual sort of update, I guess that was last week, and it seems like there's 800 and something resources out there already. The other cool thing is we also have enterprise geocoding and routing services available through the portal. So agencies don't have to pay for, let's say, using credits on AGOL and things like that. They're just able to log into portal and do that sort of analysis. And if you haven't seen the new Open Data portal, it's been out there for probably a year and a half. Go check it out. The old Geo portal isn't going to go away anytime soon. And I wish there was a single solution that let us do it all, but there's still a gap in features between this new Open Data portal from Esri and the old Geo portal, especially when it comes to file-based things and to imagery. So, you know, there will be a transition more to this sort of Open Data portal in the future, but for now, you know, you can find most of what you need. You find everything you need in the old one, or most of what you need in this one. Just to give you an overview of what we're dealing with here from computing assets, we have about 21 servers. 9 of those are physical and 12 are virtual. 2 dedicated processing workstations. About 50 terabytes of solid state storage. All of these servers reside in the computing center. I personally haven't laid eyes on any of our servers in probably a decade. The usage of these servers is pretty high. We had nearly 800 million, and you're reading that right, server requests in 2020. And our monthly computing costs, and of course we're in the Commonwealth Office of Technology, but we have to pay for what we use, are about $22,000 a month. So, you know, we're paying for all these servers and all this storage, and the agencies have to pay a little bit through the enterprise assessment, but they're not directly billed for any of that. So once again, by consolidating all of this stuff into one place and providing open access, we're really saving the agencies a lot of money from a computing cost perspective. And there's a quick and dirty graphic that kind of shows you our usage for the year. And the big thing there is obviously the KYGIS server, which is all of our public-facing map services. And, you know, you can look at that pretty easily and surmise that this was driven by COVID. There's no question about it. In February, sure, we had 12 million server requests, but look at April, 43. You know, by September, it was 74. October was a huge month with over 124 million requests. And then we're starting to taper back down there in December. So a lot of usage. Our portal usage was growing quite a bit, but we had a low December. KY raster is pretty consistent. It's usually somewhere between, you know, 6 and 12 million server requests a month, just depending on what year it is and what we're releasing. But you can't say that people aren't using this stuff. I'll put it that way. Governance. The Geographic Information Advisory Council, I think a lot of folks are aware of that. That exists as per statute. Its membership is defined in KRS 42740. Both KAMP and the Kentucky Office of Homeland Security were added as members in the past couple of years. The duties of the GIAC are also defined in statute, and I'd encourage you to go out there and take a look at that. And as per our statute, we have to provide support to the GIAC. It explicitly says that in there, and it explicitly is stated in the Commonwealth Office of Technology statutes as well, that we will provide that support. We maintain an internal strategic plan, and this is something that our team updates on an annual basis. We revisit it. Sometimes it requires some significant updates, sometimes just some minor tweaks. But the reason we look at it annually is we have to make sure that our strategic plan is always aligned with the administration's goals. And it's typical for, at least on a biennium basis, that those goals and objectives of the administration change. So it's important that we look at this, you know, like I said, on an annual basis to make sure we're in alignment with the overall goals and objectives of the administration. And I started out my professional work as a planner, and I see the value of strategic planning and making sure that you're aligning what you're doing both with your governance as it's laid out in statute and with the goals and objectives of your leadership. All right. This might be appropriate. Is there anybody have any questions right now before we move on to the KY from above topic? Ryan, I think that might be appropriate. If anybody has any questions, let me know.
Not seeing anything in the chat.
Okay, good deal. All right, not going to spend a lot of time on this. I know people have seen presentations on KY from above over and over again, but we began in 2012. I think the first procurement mechanism was set up in December of 2011, so we kind of dove into it with both feet early in 2012. And hey, you know, our goal was to build and maintain a current base map for Kentucky. And that image right there on that screen says it all. there's very few states in the nation that have statewide coverage of LiDAR and have it out there for everybody. That's a huge milestone, and it shouldn't be taken lightly. There are other states that would would give anything to have what we have here in the Commonwealth. We've done this with a standards-based approach. That is, we have a technical advisory committee that reviews and maintains standards, specifically standards from USGS and FEMA. We make sure that the Kentucky standard meets or exceeds those federal standards in all ways. We want to make sure that if the federal government gives us money to put into the program, that we deliver data to them that meets their needs. And that's one of the keys to making that happen. There were a lot of people a lot smarter than me that made sure we put those sorts of standards in place before we got started. And I appreciate the guidance from those folks many years ago that pointed out how important that was. Stakeholder-driven priorities. Simply put, if you give us money, you get to decide where we're going to spend it, more or less. So if somebody comes in and says, hey, we've got a big chunk of money we need to spend on LiDAR, and that agency's interests are situated in a certain part of the state, then obviously we'll put those monies to use in that particular geographic area. So stakeholder-driven priorities is an important function of KyFromAbove. And then collaborative funding. Our purchase mechanism has, I guess it's 5 or 6 different tiers of pricing. In those tiers of pricing, the pricing goes down per square mile as the area you acquire goes up. So what that does is encourages areas, different areas, cities, counties, regions to work together, because if we can put all of our money together, it costs less per square mile. And we've seen this play out over and over and over again, where folks have put some money in, and we've come back to them and said, hey, you know, we thought it was going to be this much to cover your area, but because so-and-so and so-and-so chipped in, we're actually able to say, hey, you know, we've cut $5,000 off that cost, or we've cut $10,000 off. And that's just based on the tiered-based pricing and collaborative funding model that we use. And then open data distribution. I mean, it's all out there. And I think everybody knows that. It's easy to get to. You know, we'd like to make it even easier to get to, but right now it's free and can be downloaded by tile. Or if you need specific smaller areas, you can clip it from our different dynamic services. The KyFromAbove website, if you want to know more about the program and get some details, you know, program information's out there. You can get to some web maps where you can download the data. If we have announcements, we typically put those there. There's a comprehensive listing of partners too. And I encourage you to go out there and take a look at that. There's a lot of people, everybody from universities up to large federal agencies have been stakeholders or partners in the process. And that's something that's quite noteworthy, especially when compared with what is going on in other states. Their partner listings seem to be a lot shorter, I'll put it that way. Status maps are out there as well. You can see what we've collected and break it down by time frame, and in some cases by partner. The specs we have out there for both imagery and LiDAR are posted, and those will be undergoing a review in the coming months. Survey reports that were used during the acquisition is out there too, and would encourage you, especially if you're in the surveying or engineering community, you may find some value in those survey reports. All right, this is good. I told Kim, I said we did good here. We got this all on one slide. For 2021, And if you look at the little inset map there, you can see, once 2021 is in the can, we'll have significant coverage on our second pass. So, everything you're seeing here is the second collection of LiDAR. And as Dr. Hainberg from KGS pointed out, the folks from USDA have pointed out, and others, this is going to be great for temporal analysis. We have 3 different areas. We're picking up McGoffin County. We're picking up Gallatin, Carroll, Henry, and Owen. And as you can see, finishing out the purchase area with Carlisle, Hickman, Fulton, and Graves. Now, we are still awaiting one grant announcement. We suspect we'll hear that any day now. There is money in here from FEMA that we're getting through Division of Water. And there's money in here from, actually from USDA, the U.S. Forest Service, that has come to us through the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources. So a little under 500,000, and as you can see, we'll be picking up USGS quality level 2 LiDAR in those areas. We're pretty excited that we're starting to fill in the state again. Imagery acquisition. And this map gives you an idea of where we stand in terms of 6-inch coverage. As you know, in 2019, we did the eastern part of the state, which really has proven to be a great thing. There are a lot of counties that fall into that red area that have never had high-resolution leaf-off aerial photography. There are 911 dispatch offices, county governments, city governments that have never had access to anything like that. And the commitment to put the money that we had in that part of the state first was a wonderful idea, and we're really pleased with the feedback we're getting. In 2020, the plan was to collect everything you see in blue and green. However, Mother Nature kind of stepped in and things started leafing out a little early, and we were not able to get the area in green. So that will be acquired this spring. And we don't have anything in the budget 100% for sure yet. We anticipate there may be an announcement regarding some funds, but we'll have to wait and see. If we do, the idea will be to pick up Breckenridge, Gratian, Edmondson, Warren, and then kind of work our way further to the west. So we're making progress. We're over halfway done, but with COVID, a change in administration, the funding that we thought we had committed for the full western part of the state is not currently available. All right. That's all on KY from above. And I know a lot of the folks that are on this call may have seen portions of this presentation during the KAMP conference. And I've gotten rid of several slides and added a couple new things here and there, but this is more about data sharing than anything. And think about that as I go through this. The reason we were able to respond so well is because of a lot of the things that we have set in place, not only because of our statutory directive to do so, but just the feeling that data sharing and collaboration is what makes us all successful. So, of course, one of the first things a lot of people saw out there was the impact dashboard, all the confirmed cases and all of that good stuff. We also used ArcGIS Hub to build an internal, and it's accessible only via password, hub site. And what you're looking at here is the Department for Public Health's COVID-19 dashboard that was embedded in that hub site. But as you can see across the top, we had dashboards and maps on testing, healthcare facilities, PPE, the distribution of PPE, infrastructure status, a lot of the infographics that were out there, economy, weather, and then we had some mapping apps that kind of pulled all this stuff together into to one view. So Hub became very useful during the response, and it was a really good way to pull a lot of various things together, because as most of you all know, if you try to put everything you've got into one map, that one map becomes pretty hard to use. Right, time series. So, all this stuff's got a date stamp on it, so it's pretty cool. We're able to do some things where, you can launch a web map and you click your little thing down at the bottom and kind of watch it play out. It's not the coolest picture that we were painting with that data. Kind of watching everything turn red across the state, but needless to say, having that temporal perspective was useful. And I've got to call attention to this. This is probably one of the coolest things that was built, and hats off to the transportation cabinet. I don't know if Mitchell or Emily or Will or anybody's on the line now, but these guys really pulled a rabbit out of the hat on this one. What they built here was a fully visually data-driven system that tracked the PPE in and out of the warehouses across the state. And a lot of other states found out that this was out there. I know Arizona in particular was very interested in trying to implement this, but this is just one of the dashboards. There were multiple dashboards with different views of this, and they were using Survey 123 and scanning barcodes within these warehouses. Just a tremendous spatial view of how our PPE was moving across the Commonwealth during the response. And hats off to those guys for their work on that. If you've seen anything we've done, you may have seen this particular hub site, and this is the public-facing one, and we were able to use it as a way to push out to the public the things that could be shared. And so all the basic dashboards and apps and web layers were out there. But also it was neat because we're able to bring in all the local resources that we were made aware of. And I think, that was good because we could showcase what was going on in Jefferson County and Lexington, Northern Kentucky, Hopkins County. There's a whole lot of good work being done. And depending on what area of the state you were from, you might find these different resources to be valuable. So thanks to everybody for sharing along those lines. The infographics pages. And these are pretty cool. And we thought people would use these a little more than they had. But, note down at the bottom or at the top, you can really just add one of these in for your own county. So in this case, if you just add in $county equals Boone, it launches this app to Boone County and then shows you the infographic for that county, shows you the state report, the county cases reports, and then the ESRI state report. So this one was pretty cool. It's getting some use by some counties, but not as much as we anticipated. If you're interested and you don't catch this URL, reach out to us. We'll get it to you. This was another county-specific dashboard, and I think we've added a little bit to it since this screen capture was done. But it'll show you the case map, the rate map, and the new incidence rate map. And once again, just county equals, and then put your county name in, proper case, and it'll zoom right to that county and set you up. This was one that was internal, and I sure wish it looked like this today. But it doesn't paint that pretty of a picture if you go look at it today in terms of the conditions our hospitals are in. But this was a regional view of hospital status by different healthcare preparedness regions. And this was something used internal by Dr. Stack and those folks to monitor what's going on out there. KYTC had one as well, that was doing it specific to each hospital, not aggregating it by region. So that way leadership had two different views into what was going on. And this was fun. This was fun for me. At least I was kind of forced to use ArcGIS Pro. It made it easier to create this, but I think everybody's seen these maps. And what happens is when the data gets updated every day, a script runs that runs just a Python script that spits these maps out in 2 or 3 minutes. And it was our understanding, we weren't asked to do this until I think June, that somebody had been spending 2 to 2.5 hours a day making maps. And we create all the maps they need from the file drop in less than 3 minutes. So automating that process and using Python and some arcade functions and stuff, we're able to spit those maps out and just automate it, just saving time and resources. Once again, you can look at the date stamp on that. That map surely doesn't look like that today, unfortunately. This is something that really caught us off guard. Jenny Schenkelfelder and Kevin Hogue on my team had worked together, and we had some encouragement from emergency management to stand up this site. And boy, it got a lot of people's attention. We didn't do anything real special because we actually were able to tap into some cool data that Esri had, but bringing it all together and putting it into one place was something that really caught some folks' attention, and other states weren't doing it. So Esri reached out to us and put together an article, and they interviewed Jenny and Kevin and Doug Eves from Emergency Management and me. And there's a couple quotes on there from Jenny and from Kevin. And I think that's right on target. We got good recognition for putting that out there. But as Jenny states, people were and still are very hungry for information about the virus. And this was a really good way to get them a little bit of information about the economic impact of it. And as Kevin points out, sure, a factory may have shut down, but what are all the places around that factory where people eat and fill up with gas every day and things like that? They're impacted as well. And so we were glad to get a little recognition from the Esri perspective. Also, the folks at Harvard reached out to us and did an article on this. And the thing that this goes back to data sharing. So this culture of open data, as they noted, really paid off tremendously. And having all this infrastructure in place is really what positioned us well to support, these response activities. If we hadn't had these enterprise databases, if all this data wasn't being shared and updated through the business processes, we wouldn't have been able to respond. We got requests from the Guard asking about state parks and their lodges and their cottages. We already had it mapped. Josh Wentz and those guys at Parks already had it mapped, and we already had it out there. We already had a map, or already all the data of all the libraries and their parking lots and all the hospitals. It was already in the can. And Dustin Horn was still at KIA at the time and reached out to the ads. And literally within 3 or 4 days, we had all the long-term care facilities mapped across the state. I mean, the willingness to help and the willingness to share across agency lines and between, local, regional, and state government, once again, really, really paid off. And we couldn't have done what we did collectively in this response had it not been for that sort of culture that we've promoted. Also, aptly so, the Exemplary System Award was given to this effort. And, gosh, I don't want to leave anybody out here, but there are definitely some people I need to call attention to. Brian Bunch specifically was instrumental in automating a lot of the processes and helping us figure out some data flow problems. So he was key to making a lot of these things function in the background. Kim and Ian and Kevin on my team obviously pitched in quite a bit. As I mentioned, the folks over at Transportation Cabinet were instrumental in this. Emergency management, Doug Eads, those guys over there, John Crowley, Mike Schutze with Health and Family Services, Ben Scott with Public Health. I mean, I could go on and on and on. The stuff that Dustin and Brian worked on for infrastructure mapping is going to be useful for many years to come. And like I said, I'm sure I'm leaving people out, but there was a large group of people that that pitched in on this, and it's nice to see that KAMP recognized the whole group. So in closing on this part, we did spin up a new geospatial preparedness GX subcommittee, and they have a mission statement and they have member tasks. That's the thing we realized, is that we've got this good collaboration started. We started opening up these lines of communication. We've actually improved some data sharing and data flow. And this won't be the last sort of big event that we have to respond to. And so the idea is to provide a little guidance and governance so that next time we have an ice storm or an earthquake or anything of that sort, that we build upon the progress we made. And, we want to make sure that everybody understands that opening this data up for broader use and sharing across agency lines is what makes our response so much more successful. So with that, I can entertain any questions that we may have. Looks like I'm just about right on time as well.
Yeah, we've got 2 questions. Okay. Charles asked if there's any privacy concerns with digging that deep into unemployment and economic vulnerability numbers. BLS only digs down to regional. Do you think county level is too close in a state with as small as counties as Kentucky?
No, and I don't think that's a problem. I think if you went down to a smaller census division, I think that would be an issue. But I don't think at the county level it's a problem. I also feel that if it was a problem at the county level, that the Bureau of Labor Statistics would not have published the data, nor would have Esri packaged it and made it so easy to consume.
Thank you. And you kind of touched on the automation and the scripting, and you've got so many dashboards and so many outside agencies that are providing the data for that. I mean, COVID specifically, how much of your dashboards and your processes are automated?
Pretty much everything. When we started, DPH was actually rebuilding the dashboard every single night, okay? And a couple hours every single night. So the cool thing was, and this is hats off to Brian, Brian literally set it up so that the folks over at Public Health drop the daily case list into a folder on a server. That folder, the file in that folder is then retrieved and run through a set of batch processes, essentially SQL Server stored procedures to aggregate that data and then render it in the form of SQL Server spatial data type tables and SDE binary tables. Because our services are hitting those tables, the services are updated instantly. After those are updated, it then fires off a script that goes out and hits the exact same data set to generate those incident rate maps and all of that. So nobody's sitting around in the afternoons waiting for this file to be dropped. They just drop the file, and literally within less than 4 minutes, the whole process is done. And, hats off to Brian and Ian for putting that stuff together and automating those processes.
Awesome. And we had one late question come in. Kyle asked to add is it too late to add the buy-in scope, such as planometrics, in the 2021 flight areas?
No, planometrics, the pricing for planometrics is not in the is not on the master purchase agreement, because there are so many different levels and people's interpretations of what planometrics are. But what can be done is, if an entity knows what footprint they want, we can get that to the vendor who is Quantum Spatial, and they can work up a quote on that. It'll be specific to their area and their needs, because I know that everybody looks at planometrics and the components within that product a little differently. So it's not too late, but if it was 5, 6, 7 weeks from now, it'd be too late. So you still got time.
Okay, that's all the questions I have. Thank you very much.
All righty. So I think next we're going to turn it over to Brian Bunch. He looks like he's sitting there ready, and almost looks like he's in a recording studio or something with his headphones on there and all. He's ready to go. So we'll turn it over to Brian, and he can explain the importance of what's been going on with these changes regarding Kentucky State Plane and the recent statutory changes that were enacted actually in July. So Brian, it's all yours.
Okay, I'm going to see which screen I need to share, because if I push the wrong one, it'll make a mess. Screen 3. I think screen 3. Let's try that one. And I just lost my Zoom screen. Can everybody see this? Can you see the National Geodetic Survey webpage?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
good deal. So the reason we're here and the reason we're talking about the State Plane Coordinate System is that the National Geodetic Survey has announced new datums coming soon. Actually, this has been in the works for over a decade, but they are close enough to release that they can announce it. However, close enough means maybe 5 years out. And if you go to geodesy.noaa.gov, NOAA, you will hit this landing page, and down here in the lower left corner are your new datums. And there's your delayed release message. They had intended for this to be released in 2022, but that is not to be. And without going into details on this particular part of it, what I want to direct you to is to go back and go into the State Plane Coordinates portion, which is just a link. And here are the State Plane Coordinates webpage. And the big thing is the SPCS 2022 policy. Now, we have policy and procedures, and starting about 2 years ago, NGS released policy and procedures with respect to the individual states proposing and then submitting their own designs for a new state plane coordinate system for the new datums. And they completely revamped their policies and procedures in that regard. I'm kind of limited on time, and as a courtesy to David Lucas, I'm going to try not to get too far into the weeds on this, but I do want to cover it in enough territory that at least you know what's going on. And if you don't, you at least know where to go to get more information on it. But to make a long story short, Kentucky got on the bandwagon early. Not only did we submit our proposal, we submitted our designs, and we are actually the first state in the country to have their State Plane 2022 coordinate system actually designed and approved by the National Geodetic Survey. Now, that doesn't mean we can start using the 2022 designs because 2022 hasn't been published yet. It's not released, it's not ready. But we did get ahead of the game, and we do have our approved state plane coordinate system. Now, what I want to do is direct you to geodesy.ky.gov. This is a recent web page that we stood up in response to having set up a new state plane coordinate system, or at least stage it. Now, the first thing we had to do with respect to that is to actually change the Kentucky Revised Statute that pertains to state plane coordinates, and actually that's KRS-1. And KRS-1 pertains to the boundary of Kentucky, believe it or not. So I guess that kind of underscores how geography is important, knowing where you are. The first statute in KRS is actually the state boundary and the coordinate system. But if we go to, we're going to get started. We've got governance, stakeholders, and resources. And governance is just pointing out the Kentucky Revised Statutes. Now, we did have those changed and revised in the last legislative session. They were approved and signed into law and enacted effective July 15th, 2020. So we made some considerable changes to that, and I'll try to go over that briefly in a minute. We are still on the old 10 KAR 5.010, which actually established the Kentucky single zone. We are in the midst of revising the administrative regulations to be more in line with the new revised statutes. But before we can do that, we have incorporated by reference this little ditty called the Kentucky State Plane Coordinate System Standards and Specifications document. And it is in draft form, and it gets into the nitty-gritty details. It's a very comprehensive document, and that's where you should really start if you're really interested in this. And what I'm going to do is actually try to, whoops, you got a sneak preview into my next section, but let's pull this up. Can you see that? I can't see what you see. I can only see what I see. So can someone verify that the state plane standards and specs doc is on their screen?
Yes.
Excellent. Yes. Excellent. This is new. It's in draft form, and hopefully after tomorrow it would be approved to come out of draft form. And this document will eventually essentially define the state plane coordinate system, and it will do it across all the datums, not just the current datum in effect, which right now is NAD 83. In the past, when states set up their legislations, they essentially created a legislation for just the state plane coordinate system in effect for the datum in effect. In Kentucky, what that meant is even though we had NAD 27 and we had a complete coordinate system that our interstate highway system was built on, the legislation establishing the state plane coordinate system only pertained to NAD 83. And within the legislation, it specified the details of the zone parameters for that system. That means it was locked in. And the only way to change the system was to actually change the statute. And that's quite a process. So when we went into this, we decided that, first of all, we really need to find a way to bring NAD 27 into the fold, keep NAD 83, and when we do the new system, of course, we need to cover that. And it turns out that defining all of that straight within the statute is really not an efficient way to go about it. So we actually changed the statute, and I'm going to just go there. So here we have, this is the statute. And we're going to start with section 020. What we did is just generically describe the system. The Kentucky State Plane Coordinate System, which is hereby adopted, means a system of plane coordinates which have been established by the National Oceanic and atmospheric administration through its National Geodetic Survey for, oh, that's the definition. I want to go to section 2. For this system, the Commonwealth, through the Commonwealth Office of Technology under KRS 42650 and advised by the GEAC under KRS 42740, shall establish and publish a series of layered zones covered by geodetically referenced mapping projection adopted and supported by the National Geodetic Survey as a component of the National Spatial Reference System. Each series of zones shall be identified by the geodetic datum upon which they are defined, and each zone shall remain uniquely and consistently defined throughout its implementation within a particular series. This one paragraph covers the definition and the adoption of the entire system that we can now define through the KAR and subsequently through the standards and specification document. That means as the system changes, we can adapt to those changes quickly without having to go through legislative action. Now, that doesn't mean we can just do this willy-nilly. We're still bound by the KAR, and we are still bound to do any of these changes through the Geographic Information Advisory Council, which covers all of the stakeholders who are involved. Therefore, that any time we go through a change, this is going to require the consent of all the stakeholders. Now, that's many state government agencies, and that also includes the Kentucky Association of Professional Surveyors. I think it includes now the Kentucky Association of Mapping Professionals, KAMP, this group, and the Kentucky Society for Professional Engineers, the Geological Survey. So through the GEAC, and this is why it's so important for everybody to participate in the GEAC, or at least be informed through the GEAC, is that the GEAC is your opportunity to have a voice in these matters. Again, instead of the specific parameters for the state plane coordinate system being ensconced within the statute, we now have a more adaptive system for pulling that off. So how are we on time? David Lucas, when are you expecting to start your presentation? Because I really don't want to hold you up too far.
I'll start when you're done. I will adjust accordingly. Go ahead, Brian.
Okay, so what I want to do is, now that we've laid the groundwork, I do want to say this. We are currently in draft form, and we have within this document, by the way, that you can download through geodesy.ky.gov, Appendix B does cover the proposed language for the KAR. Now, specifically in the KAR, what is important beyond the definitions here is that Section 2, incorporation by reference, and it says the Commonwealth Office of Technology, as advised by the GEAC, shall develop and maintain the Kentucky State Plane Coordinate System standards and specifications document, herein referred to as the KSPCS Standards Spec Stock. All right, the KSPC standards and specifications document is incorporated by reference. Now, this is a very important term of art, but what this means is that the document itself, which goes into a very fine-grained level of detail regarding the state plane coordinate system, becomes part of the KAR. And this is what's going to allow us to adopt the changes as time moves on. And this is why it's important for you guys to be involved and for you guys to be interested and really learn about this through this document. Now, what we're doing is we're looking at the KAR through the document itself. So everything is in this document. I'm actually going through the document as I present it. And again, I'm not going to go into all the details here, but at least show you that everything you need is in this document. Now, I'm at a juncture. Okay, so Appendix C really goes through the series, and this is where we actually bring NAD 27 into the realm of a statutorily defined state plane coordinate system. We did not have this when NAD 83 was enacted. NAD 27 was essentially cast aside. We've now brought it back in. So if you've got documents, and if there's boundary surveys that are tied to NAD 27, that has now been brought into the realm of a statutorily accepted coordinate system. And so I'm going to put this aside, and this is a slide that I have taken directly from a Michael Dennis presentation, a webinar presentation. And we do indeed love projected coordinate systems. And a shout out to Jeff Jobsikowski, who is our NGS regional advisor, for coming up with the slogan, SPCS 2022, making the earth flat, again, one zone at a time. Now I want to go to something that we all should be familiar with, and that is defining a data frame properties for an ArcGIS project. And if you, usually you'll go to the projected coordinate system, state plane. Now under state plane, you'll notice we have just a whole bunch of NAD 83 options. And I'm going to say that all of these are essentially the same. And unless you're doing high accuracy GPS work, they all relate to the same thing. And under the hood, they are the same thing. What's different about them is if you're going to engage in transformations, which you're not generally. Some of you will, obviously. But the critical one, the one that's of the most use, is just the simple NAD 83. Whoops, I didn't mean to click on that. And then you'll have the three options of the single zone, the north zone, and south zone. Now, one thing I do want to iterate here is we are currently on the U.S. foot. Now, the U.S. foot is a vestige of what's called the Mendenhall Order from 1893, and the first iteration of the survey foot was introduced at that time. We remained on that. We weren't supposed to stay on it for NAD 83, but NGS dropped the ball, and it kind of continued on. In 1959, the International Foot was adopted, and except for geodetic surveys, it was to be the single standard for the U.S. for the foot definition in the country. Long story short is that fell through, but for 2022, the U.S. survey foot will be deprecated. It's declared obsolete as of December 31st, 2022. So the new state plane coordinate system for Kentucky is going to be defined using the international foot. Here's the familiar north zone and south zone, and this shows Kentucky was traditionally split. Again, we don't want to forget our neighbors over in UTM. Again, Kentucky is split. And then obviously we needed the single zone, and that is particularly true for people like Kent who need to represent the state or map the state as a whole and not in two separate parts. And lest you not know that each coordinate system does have a specific domain, a spatial domain. And a lot of times in the absence of any specific metadata, you can actually refer to this chart and try at least to determine a set of coordinates, if they are Kentucky state plane coordinates, what they represent. Now that's probably not possible for these three systems or zones, the NAD 27 South Zone, the North 27 North Zone, and the 83 North Zone, because they essentially occupy the same spatial domain. Lucky enough for the South Zone, they put it in a different coordinate range, at least in the northings, the Ys. Now when we designed the single zone, we specifically targeted the domain, the spatial domain, for a complete unique range. And as you can see that if you're looking at a set of coordinates for the single zone, they're going to be unique with respect to the eastings, the X coordinates, and the northings, the Y coordinates. And this was intentional. Okay, this is the part of the presentation where we have the talk, and that is we need to talk about gravity. Mapping projections are inherently abstract mathematical creatures. They have no existence in the real world, and we live in the real world. So in order to get to an abstract mathematical frame, we need to transition the real world into this mathematical realm. Now, the way we do that is we do it through gravity. And the reason we do it through gravity is that we are gravitational beings. Everything we do, whether we know it or not, we do under the influence of a gravitational field. As a matter of fact, every observation we make is calibrated to gravity. When a surveyor sets up their instrument, they are plumbing it over the point, and they are leveling the horizontal plate to be perpendicular to gravity. The plumb line, the plumb bob, that's essentially a gravity vector. Your standard carpenter's level, well, the level gives you perpendicular to gravity as well. The room you're sitting in, you look at the walls run with gravity, and the ceiling and the floor runs perpendicular to gravity, except the walls and floor in my house. They're all over the place. But so we use gravity. Gravity is probably the most important measurement we have. And when we talk about modeling the Earth, and especially modeling the shape and size of the Earth, we're generally talking about the shape of the Earth relative to mean sea level. And back in the old days, that had meaning because you could walk to the shore and there's sea level. You could see it, you could touch it, mostly. But in the modern age, the way we look at sea level is we essentially represent it as a magnitude of gravitational force. And we look and we determine a magnitude of gravitational force that best fits mean sea level. And then the geoid essentially is us trying to map the entire Earth and what it would look like relative to this constant magnitude of gravitational force relative to a smooth mathematical surface that would emulate gravity if the Earth didn't spin, if there were no tidal forces, the moon and sun were not of influence, and we had no wind, that it could just be a quiescent if it was just a ball of water. And so what you're looking at here is anomalies as to what we actually measure gravity to be as to what it should be if everything was uniform. Now, what this reveals, and this is a great way of visualizing the geoid, is that it's not smooth. The Earth is essentially a lump, and it's better modeled by a sort of spherical potato than it is an actual sphere. But this is very useful because this provides us with the foundation for determining a spheroid, which is an abstract mathematical notion, but we can have a mathematical function that across all points are calculable. We can calculate everything throughout the range of the sphere itself. And we need that. In order to have mapping projections, we need a smooth mathematical surface that emulates the Earth, but we start with trying to best fit that to the geoid, which is what we actually experience. Now, with regards to NAD 27 and NAD 83, there are two different ellipsoids involved that try to best fit the Earth, the geoid. Now, with NAD 27, gravity wasn't such a big deal because it was difficult to measure at that time, and I just don't think it came into play that much. So it was a geometric construct. But the way the NAD 27 was established is they took the Clark 1866 ellipsoid and they positioned it on the North American continent and oriented it relative to a local azimuth to Meade Ranch, Kansas. So what you have is an ellipsoid that best fits and better fits the North American continent. You know, we didn't care about the rest of the world. I mean, you could only survey so much with line of sight, with optical surveying and triangulation networks. So setting up a global system was really not of importance back then. But by the time NAD 83 came around, GRS 80 ellipsoid was developed to better meet the needs of the modern times. Now, one thing we need to note here is that when you go from different datums, the orientation and positioning of the reference ellipsoids plays a big role in the datum shifts. So we have a new state planes for 2022, and this is a slide from Michael Dennis's latest presentation he had done last summer. The state plane coordinate system of 2022 will be referenced to the 2022 terrestrial reference frame. It will still be based on the same reference ellipsoid. The GRS 80 ellipsoid was so well done in the 70s that it's going to be used again. And we're going to use the same 3 conformal projection types as SPCS 83 and 27. Kentucky, we're very familiar with the Lambert conformal conic. It is best suited for the shape of Kentucky, actually best suited for the shape of the North Zone and the South Zone. But there's the transverse Mercator and the oblique Mercators. And actually with the new zones that have been designed, the original designs used all 3. But a refinement on that, we're using the Lambert conformal and the oblique Mercator. Now, this is a quick diagram. I'm not going to go into all the details, but this is just to try to demonstrate the differences between the ellipsoid, which is the surface we're projecting from, the mapping surface, which is the projection grid, the surface we're projecting to, and of course the topographic surface, because we don't live and work on the projection grid or the ellipsoid, we work on the topographic surface. And what this diagram shows is the differences in distances relative to each of these surfaces for a given projection scheme. Now, this is essentially where the terms of distortion come from. When we're talking about mapping distortion, we're actually talking about differences in distances measured on these various surfaces or conveyed on these various surfaces. And the most important of these two essentially is the ground distance with the grid distance. Here's another diagram that shows it in terms of the projection axis. And for NAD 27 and NAD 83, they use this lower scheme, what's called a secant developable surface. And the way it was implemented is the idea was that over the complete zone width, that the distortions were evenly balanced. And so there's a limit as to how wide you can go. Now, the NGS tried to limit that to 1 part in 10,000 over the entire zone. And that meant that relative to the ellipsoid. Now, what that meant is the total width of a zone was limited to about 160 miles. And that's why Kentucky was split into 2 different zones. Any bigger than that, and you're going to get into realms beyond 1 part or 10 parts per million, which is 1 part in 10,000, 100 parts per million. So let me check for time. I'm going to accelerate this because I do want to get into the actual designs. So with the SPCS 2022, the goals are to minimize distortion at the topo surface, not the ellipsoid. We're going to have a maximum of 3 zone layers. Actually, Kentucky's the first state in the country to have actually implemented a multi-layered scheme. That's when we introduced the single zone We already had a layer, the north and south zone, that covered the entire state. And in 2001, we implemented the single zone, and that essentially created a new layer. And the concept wasn't even thought about back then, and we actually did this accidentally. We just wanted a single zone, and it turns out once we implemented it, we had a dual layered system. This is now the policy. All states will have at least one single zone projection, and most states are going to have 2 layers: a single zone projection with a multi-zoned statewide coverage layer. Now, many states have made requests and proposals. Kentucky has done both. NGS has essentially designed our statewide system with our input. We actually did that during a subcommittee meeting, the GAC subcommittee meeting. We honed in on the new state single zone parameters. Now, if a state does not present their own designs, default zones with no input from the stakeholders will be designed by the National Geodetic Survey, or zones formally requested by the states, and Kentucky did that. Now, when you're going to design a scheme based on minimizing topographic surface to the grid, you really need to know what the topo surface is like. And since we're dealing with a statewide, and I'm going analog on you here. This is an old diagram. A.K. Lobeck did this in 1929, 1930. And if you consume many geologic reports, you're going to see different forms of this diagram in many reports. It's been a venerable diagram, but it does really demonstrate the diversity of topography and landforms we do have across the state. But if you're going to start trying to design a scheme to minimize ground to grid, well, this is a good place to start. Now, thanks to Drew Andrews and Emily Morris of the Kentucky Geological Survey, we were able to actually look at a finer grained delineation of landforms in the state. And this was actually very helpful, because we're looking at similar landforms, and the idea here is because one of the parameters for the state plane coordinate system when you start designing your zones is that preferably zones are combinations of whole counties. Now, that's the north and south zones, a combination of whole counties. When we went into the process of designing new zones for Kentucky, the idea was, well, why don't we try to base this on existing groupings of counties, groupings that people are probably already familiar with, so they don't have to learn a new grouping of county. I couldn't tell you the north and south zone counties. There's too many of them, but I don't use that enough to even really to care. So the idea is that we would try to find groupings of counties that exist, and we're talking about administrative groupings of counties that fit these landforms, these zones, these areas. And really the one that, well, let me back up. One thing that we recognized is that of all the stakeholders that really put the state plane coordinate system to use would be the transportation cabinet. And the obvious reason is that they're maintaining the state highway system. And not only that, but they construct highways. They construct 10-mile long sections of highway at a time. And so the first idea was to maybe use those as the basis of county groupings. But it turns out that the size and shapes of those districts just didn't support what we were trying to accomplish with minimizing ground to grid. It was going to be much less than optimal. But we do have a grouping that does match that, and that is the area development districts. So you can see the pennyrile area, the purchase area, and then the pennyrile along the southern border of Kentucky, the Appalachian Hills with the Cumberland Valley, the Kentucky River, actually Five Co and Gateway. The Bluegrass region is its own topographic area, physiographic province. So of all of the administrative groupings in Kentucky, the area development districts proved to be more consistent, and I'm going to flip back. You have to look hard, but you can see it, that the ads really do match up fairly well with the physiographic provinces. So this is how we ended up splitting up Kentucky and actually combining the ads into the various state plane coordinate zones. So what you're looking at here is really your first introduction into the 7 zones that will comprise the KSPCS 2022 low distortion projection layer scheme. And the next slide really demonstrates how well the ads cover the physiographic regions of Kentucky. These are the performance analysis for the zones, and the scale is in parts per million, and these are distortion values relative to the topographic surface. This is not relative to an abstract spheroid. This is the actual topographic surface, and we use the latest LiDAR data to do the analysis and actually tweak the zones to best fit ground to grid. Now, to give you an idea, 10 parts per million, that's 1 part per 100,000. That is essentially 1 foot per 20 miles. If you measure 20 miles of distance, you're going to be represented on the map, on the zone map, you're going to be off by a foot. That is incredible. We cannot measure. You can't build highways to that level of accuracy. 20 parts per million, that's 1 part in 50,000. So we are talking about 1 part in 10 miles, thereabouts. So the idea actually was to cover the entire state as best we could to 1 part in 30, or to 30 parts per million, which is 1 part in 33,000 or better. I really did not expect to achieve this level of performance, but these are true low distortion projections.
Hey, Brian, this
Yes.
is Ken. Try to wrap up in the next minute or so David and Mike have time to finish up before 4.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I needed that. So here are the projection performance results. Down here below, we have actually a completely redesigned single zone. And to give you a brief review, when we did the original Kentucky single zone, we actually tried to design that based on a ground-to-grid performance, but we didn't have LiDAR. We actually, all we had was the centroid of the various 7.5-minute quads and the highest and lowest elevation that appears in that quad. That's how we designed the single zone, the original single zone, to minimize topographic surface to the grid. And one consideration that we had with doing that is we tilted the state slightly to favor the urban areas of northern Kentucky as opposed to the southwest parts of the purchase area. Sorry about that, folks, but that was really that was actually a consensus of the entire group at that time. But now that we have low distortion zones, that is no longer necessary. So the new single zone is essentially centered and balanced to minimize distortions on the topographic surface. So we're going to go, this should be familiar to you from a previous slide. And this kind of shows you the coordinate space occupied by the various zones and the new single zone. So again, as you can see, each zone occupies its own unique space relative to the others and relative to existing zones, and actually relative to UTM. That's it. Do we have any questions?
No questions in the chat. Was wondering, you talked about the that document, the PDF that was in draft was available for download. Do you think you could put the link to that in the chat for everybody? I think that that's a great resource for everyone to see, just to know what's coming and how they need to prepare.
Absolutely. So I can stop sharing, unless somebody needs me to show them something, I can stop sharing the screen and then I can type in that URL in the chat directly.
Yeah, let's go ahead and turn it over to Mike and David, and Brian and I can get that link in the chat. We can send them a link to the page, Brian. That's probably easiest. Then they've got everything.
Okay, good deal.
Thank you, Brian. Great presentation.
Hey, Mike, you want to take over here?
Sure thing, glad to do it. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mike Sinceri. I hold dual roles with the Kentucky Office of Homeland Security. I'm the Deputy Executive Director of KOHS and also the Administrator of the 911 Services Board. And one of the other duties I have is Legislative Liaison for KOHS. And I was more than glad to help out Kent when he gave me a call and asked if I could help shepherd the state plane update bill through the General Assembly in 2020. When we first went before a legislative committee that was on the House side, we had secured a bill sponsor, Representative Jim Duplessis, who is an engineer, and we had a great team up at the table, Kent as well as Bill Heineman, and felt very confident we could field any question that perhaps could come up. It glided through the House committee, glided through the House, and then COVID hit, and things started slowing down. I knew how important this was to this group, so we kept pushing gently, of course, to try to get this passed in the 2020 session, and finally was able to get it before a Senate committee. Unfortunately, by that time, we were in a situation where very few people were going to be allowed or able to appear before a legislative committee. So we lost our state geologist. Kent was not able to present before us, and even our bill sponsor was not able to appear at the table, which left myself, who is a non-mapping person, a non-GIS expert, to present the bill. And I tell you, I've never been so scared in my life that someone's going to ask a technical question about this bill as I was when I was sitting up there by my lonesome. But fortunately, the only question that came up during the presentation was if someone could explain the difference between a US foot and a international foot. And it was just made in jest, and we went right over it, and the bill passed with nary a nay vote and was unanimously adopted by the General Assembly. So I was glad to get that passed for y'all. All right, moving over to Next Generation 911. So what is NG 911? The answer to that question really depends on what the constituency or what audience member you ask. From a public's perspective, NG 911 may mean the ability to send photos, video, text to a 911 call center, which we refer to as a PSAP, or Public Safety Answering Point. If you ask a PSAP, a telecommunicator, how they define it, they may say something along the lines of, well, is interconnectivity. It's an IP-enabled network that allows all call centers to be connected, share information, share data, rather than operate as individual silos, which is by and large how most call centers operate today, where any information they have, it doesn't go beyond the four walls of the PSAP. But for this audience, for you folks, the key distinction for NG 911 is the transition from having wireless calls routed based on cell phone triangulation, where depending on where a cell phone signal hits on what tower, it is then routed to a particular 911 call center, which, as you can imagine, is a very imprecise science. You know, you're basically talking angles and geometry And it works pretty well, but there is dozens, if not hundreds of instances a day where calls have to be transferred from one call center to another because it pinged the wrong tower. So from a next-gen perspective, it's a whole evolutionary change, a true paradigm shift where calls are routed geospatially. So based on the XY coordinate that comes along with the caller information, that determines, based on geofence, call center's jurisdictional boundaries of where that call is going to be routed to. And that is done by one central brain. So one processing center piece of equipment in a next-gen environment can route every call that comes into the Commonwealth. And as you can imagine, because calls are going to eventually be routed geospatially, GIS mapping becomes the absolute cornerstone of emergency response. And that's where our presentation is going to focus today. So if you go to the next slide, please, David. So next-gen 911 absolutely cannot work unless we have not only accurate information today, but ongoing, accurate, updated mapping. So this will entail adoption of new standards and metrics that all of our certified call centers, of which there are 117 in the Commonwealth, to be able to follow to ensure that they are presenting the information in a proper format that will be able to eventually be quality assured, quality controlled, and stitched into the first ever statewide map. So we formed a working group to make this a collaborative process, to have input from not only 911, but other first responder entities, local government officials, and our technical consultant to ensure that we've brought everyone along this path and have provided them opportunity to have input into the final product. So we have come up with a next generation mapping guide, in large part due to the assistance of Kent's team over at DGI, as well as our technical consultant. So I'm going to turn the floor over now to David Lucas, who is going to explain the last leg of our next gen mapping guide, which is site and structure address points.
Thanks, Mike. And the audience we have today is GIS professionals. I worked in GIS for many years or decades before I moved into 911. And it is great to see that GIS is now the cornerstone for 911 because it is something we recognized decades ago. So in the state of Kentucky, we have developed mapping requirements, and these are requirements that every 911 center must meet in order to continue to receive funds from the board. Some of these you might have already realized, and I hope that you are working with local or maybe regional groups on their GIS and data requirements. Now, the requirements we have are national standard based. They're a subset of NENA's I3 requirements, NENA being the National Emergency Number Association. The requirements are for routing of calls by location, as Mike pointed out before, and this is the verification of an address before routing. So basically, addresses and civic addresses are verified that they are valid before we get a call and we actually have to use that address for routing. The PSAPs, which are the 911 centers, their whole point is to get a quicker response. If you think about 911, someone places a call and it's a search and rescue. We have to find them and provide them services. So we want less search and more rescue because that's what saves lives. So the existing requirements that we have for submittal are as follows, and most people here should or be aware of what these are. PSAP boundaries that we mentioned before, these have been required to be submitted since 2019. Emergency response boundaries, or ESBs, which represent law enforcement, fire, and EMS response boundaries. Those also were required in October of 2019. And of course, the infamous road center lines that all of us work with on a daily basis. These were first required submittal last year, and the data schema included the current version in the mapping guide, which we will be referring to often, but is also available at the CMRS board's website for those who want to download that document, which outlines specific data structure and has examples, many of the examples we will talk about today. So what we're moving to next is going to be address points. Starting July of this year, 2021, SSAP, site and structure address points, will be a required submittal in every PSAP jurisdiction. They are not currently in the mapping guide. They have been approved by the board, by the recommendations of their committee, and we are implementing those into the guide as we speak. But there's many types of address points, and many people who work in the urban areas are well aware that an address point has many versions. There are address structures. We are defining those as occupiable spaces, residents or businesses. Sub-addresses being the units, suites, apartments, etc. So a strip mall might have one address but have multiple units, and every unit is has a suite number. Or think of an apartment complex. It might have 15 buildings. Each building might have 6 apartments, and every one of those has an apartment number. Those are sub-addresses. And finally, there are sites, which are non-occupiable structures. Think of a soccer field, a baseball field, cell towers. 911, we are big on cell towers. We have to know where they are, and that's because currently calls are routed by cell phone towers. And so those are required for us. Additional, think of marine slips, lakes, things like that. And we'll have examples of those through our presentation today. So here's an example of structure points. As you can see, these are your basic. I put a dot in the middle of the residence, and then we assign an address to it. In the first slide, you can see the dots are placed immediately in the middle of each building. Another method that is used is placing it at the entrance. As you can see, these are more towards the front of each unit. These are duplexes. And in this business structure, you can see every one of these suites have an individual address assigned to Race Street, 302 through 342. The top row, all the address points are placed in the middle of each structure. And the bottom row, they are at the actual access point, or where we would want emergency services or someone to enter the structure, usually at the front door, and each of these represent that. Both of these methods are correct. It is a local preference, and we do not provide a requirement to go one way or the other, even though I think 80 to 90% of public safety prefer the dot in the middle of the structure. And we'll talk about that further as we go through our examples. Here's a structure point placement for a single building. You can see 3421 placed right in the middle. Here is a large building that actually has 2 units. Each unit might have 4 subunits, all addressed off Christian Avenue. So in this case, the address points are placed at the entrance for clarity. Structure point placement here, we have a campus environment on 170 Boswick, and the dot is placed in the middle of the campus to represent all of these buildings. The image in the middle is also one address, and so they place the dot in the middle to represent all of these buildings. And finally, one that we're all very familiar with throughout our state are trailer parks. In this instance, one trailer park, this has one address, and so the point represents all of the structures in that facility. This is just a structure point placement. Now, if you go and assign an address to each structure, you can see that this now has, whoops, too heavy on the clicker. We will go back. You can see that this has 3 points. This now has 4 points, 1 on each building, and then the trailer park now has an address point for every single trailer, as they are distinct units within this campus environment. So let's talk about sub-addresses. So we're going back to our example of one building with one address point. But within this building, there are actually multiple units, 6 units, and they are identified A through F. So you could place a dot or a point on each one of the individual units, or you could put one at the entrance and say that entrance is how you get to each of the units. Both of those are acceptable, and we leave it up to the locals on the preferred method of doing that. Here's some more sub-address placements, our trailer park. And if you go in and assign an address to each of the trailers, you would put a dot on the middle of each one, as you can see. So they're all 550. And in this case, they gave them lot numbers. Other places might give them individual apartment numbers. And some people go as far as naming the streets and giving every trailer a unique address or a full civic address. So that is talk about sub-addresses. Let's go to site points. And this is a representation of a recreational facility. As you can see, this park actually has 2 buildings, Building A and a fitness center, but it also has a tennis courts and ball fields. So think if someone actually placed a 911 call from this campus, this park. If they called from the fitness center, we might really see they're in a fitness center, and they would say, I'm in the fitness center. We would go to 3390, the address. But if an incident happens in a tennis court or out on the field, they're actually outside of a structure. So we are seeking site points, actually a point in the middle of the field in the tennis court that represents when someone places a call, the device finds the closest address. So when we get the 911 call, we know we are going to 3390 ball field 2 or ball field 1 or tennis court. It reduces the search and the search and rescue. Site points can get more complicated. Here is a lake in Western Kentucky. As you can see, the traditional address points are on the residents around the lake. Additional points should be placed inside the water bodies. So if someone actually calls from a boat, which happens quite often, we would actually get an address for dispatching to one of these bodies of water. As you can see, if someone called and said they were in the lake, there's a lot of water bodies we could respond to. If we know the closest point is 8910, the dispatch center will know which body of water. And if you want to go a little further, you can actually assign address points to the docks here so they know where to enter into the water body as well. All of these are site points. They are sites that are public access, that are used for recreational use, and these are high call generating locations throughout Kentucky. I'm going to talk about access points. Access points are used throughout Kentucky. They are not a requirement in the NextGen 911 system. We do recognize they are used in many places in the state. So we are setting up rules for access points. So a point of access to get to an address point. It's usually a driveway entrance or a gate. They must be associated with an address point, and it can go one to many or many to one relationship. And as you know, they're prevalent in the rural areas where you cannot see the site from the right-of-way or from the street that it's named off of, a hidden entrance. And we'll go through some examples of these. The first one is access points. This is out in Harlan County. You can see from the map, the addresses are 510 through 518 Range Street. And then over here, you have an odd number listed for 523. But when you look at the aerial photo, you'll see this grouping are all on the street, but 523 is actually up on the hill. It does not represent this barn, but it actually represents a occupiable structure on the hill, which can better be seen when you see the full aerial photo. The access point is here at the bottom of the image. You enter through this driveway to get to this occupiable space. So this case, they have an access point here, so they know to send the first responders to this entrance to access 523. And I suspect eventually they will address these non-occupiable buildings, this barn and this shed, so that all of these structures will be associated with this access point. Here's another example where the structure on top of this hill, when this is not in the fall and leaf on, you would never see, actually you probably wouldn't even see the driveway to get to this on the top of the hill. So an access point has been assigned here in the lower corner of your image, and it is going to the structure point on the top. So there's a one-to-one relationship between the access point and the structure points. Here is a place in Fayette County. You can see in the lower left, we have the blue dots representing access points. We have a one-to-one for 3320 Huffman Mill to this residential. This residential actually has two accesses, but we are informing people this is how you access this structure. The next, you see these three access points, and they represent these three groupings of buildings: 3310, 3312, and 3314. So these are one-to-one and one-to-many relationships for access points to address points. Back to our favorite park. You can see before the access is this yellow circle. This is how the preferred method to get to 3390. However, this building A over here, actually the preferred access might be to the back to get to this garage or building A. So the access point could be assigned for this one structure, while this access is assigned to the rest of the points. So what type of facilities fall under the requirements that we have? Structure addresses, these are a representative sample of what was being defined as a structured address. These are all occupiable spaces, basically from single structure, single property, one address, multiple addresses, multiple story office buildings. This is the common addresses that people think of. These are, they have been addressed. These are required from our first, this July of 21. Next are site addresses. These are the ones that we said there's not actually a structure there, but maybe a campground or a slip, landmarks. Phone booths, yes, they are still phone booths out there in the world, and roadside phones. Some people know them as blue phones or emergency service phones. Of course, water bodies. We talked about barns and water bodies. Athletic fields. Imagine a campus, or there are sports facilities in Kentucky that might have 16 softball fields. If someone says they broke their leg or there's a heart attack at the softball field, once we get there, there's 16 locations to go to. So we recommend a point on each one of those softball fields. So when someone calls 911, we can know exactly which field we're going to, because there might be 16 fields on that campus, but there might be 4 entrances, and we need to know which entrance goes to which softball field. And then finally, these are recommended addresses. We recommend you also address water bodies greater than 2 acres or designated for recreational use, temporary addresses, and especially mines, gas wells, and oil wells. As you know, if there's an emergency response in that area, time is of the essence. Now, here's an overview of the 3 types of points and the milestones for each. So we got structure points, structure and site points, and then the inclusion of sub-addresses. And these are the milestone requirements. So this July, we need structure points. Next year in 2022, you need site points. And then by 2023, you need sub-addresses. And the reason we laid it out this way is if someone is going to collect a subdivision or a new area of town, they might as well go ahead and get it down to the sub address level. If you're there once in the field, collect it all. But initially, we need the structure points coming up in this year. And I would say over 80% of the counties have some sort of address points for structures. All right, there's funding opportunities for this. And hopefully you guys have already heard about the funding cycle that the board has coming up. It's already open in November and it closes in about actually 1 month from today on February 19th. Please get with your PSAPs or others and ask if they are preparing a grant in order to collect, maintain any of the address points that we talked about or any of the GIS layers that are required and mentioned in today's presentation. If you think it's too late to work with them and partner and get information, get money for this grant cycle, start planning for the next one. November of this year, we're going to open up another grant cycle, and the current preference is for GIS products and services to secure these data layers. Here's an overview of all the data layers, the dates and requirements, and as I mentioned, funding is available to create, maintain any of these data layers as long as it meets the requirements to submit to the board to reach Next Gen 911 requirements. I went through that rather quick because I wanted to leave some time for questions, either through the chat box or verbally. So at this time, I could go back to any slide or answer any questions there might be.
Dave, this is Tom East. I saw part of this presentation back, I think it was November.
Yes.
And there was some discussion there about when this was going to get put into the guide that was available on the 911 board website. And I think you were saying it's being worked on as we speak.
Our internal deadline is get it done before February. So within the next week, we've already started it. That's our current timeline.
Okay. And I would just like to say that for the grant stuff, people may not know this unless they're a PSAP or have been working with PSAPs, that those grants have to be submitted through the PSAPs. The GIS department, cannot apply for the grant themselves. It has to come through the PSAP or through, I believe, the county.
That is correct, Tom. That's a very good point. The grants are only awarded to certified PSAPs or PSAPs that are becoming certified. So they are actually the awardee, but they can obviously contract with others or spend it within their own. For instance, I know in Lexington, the 911 board might apply for the grant, but the money is actually spent with the GIS section to maintain address points, for example. But Tom, you make an excellent point.
I would also like to say that if you have not already done this and you're placing points on structures for structure points, and you have building footprints, polygons, it's advisable to put those points within the building polygon for later correlation use with attribute transfer between points and the polygons themselves. If you, for example, this is especially important with tall structures. You have a 10-story building or a water tower. The photo may be misleading in where you place the point. So be sure you're placing it where the footprint of the structure is. It has to be within that footprint.
That is correct. Very good point. Lesson learned, I can tell, but that is true.
And David, there was a question in the chat from Demetrio, reads, there appear to be no standards for sub-addressing. Isn't that inviting some chaos at PSAP jurisdictional edges?
We will address, I hate to say address that. That will be referenced in the upcoming document. There are sub-address requirements set up by NINA, and it is not a free flow of information in that field. There is standards so that data could be transferred between systems. There used to be no standards, and it was almost a free flow of information in the sub-address, but that has changed. And we'll have some of those details in that document.
All right, good deal. If there are no other questions, I want to thank David for the presentation and also take this opportunity to introduce the 911 Services Board's in-house geoprocessing specialist, who is Watson Harding. He's on the call with us, so any questions that are of a GIS nature can be routed directly to Watson, and he is in the state global system, so it's watson.harding@ky.gov. And want to thank this organization for the opportunity to present before you today.
I did see there was one more question in the chat about training. Is any training provided? I assume that is referring to our presentation based on the listing of questions. There will be many regional sessions if we're allowed to do things in person again. If not, we will be doing remotely, specifically to two groups, to the public safety group of professionals on how addressing is very important, and also to the GIS community on how to work with public safety and get the data in. So there will be some training provided, especially in the next 12 months. And then we anticipate to have it ongoing, specifically at the Public Safety Convention conference, and also at maybe KAMP's conference as well.
Right, and this presentation was also given to the Keene and APCO 911 Staff Association at their quarterly meeting, the last quarter, back at the end of 2020.
All right, thank you very much.
Thanks, David.
David, Mike, Watson, thank you very much. Kent, did you have anything else to add?
No, not at this time. Nothing else to add specifically. If anybody has any questions, I think most people know how to get in touch with us. Please reach out. And as Mike indicated, thanks for the opportunity. Wanted to special thanks to Brian, Mike, and David for taking the time to prepare for this. And we appreciate the opportunity to try to bring everybody up to speed about what we're doing at DGI. Thank you.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. All the thanks needs to go to everyone with DGI and the K911 Service Board. Thank you for taking the time to share with us everything that's going on with Kentucky. I think this is great information. And we've got some questions about sharing the presentation. We did record this. We will be in the next couple weeks working on it, and we will share that with the group through Facebook and YouTube so that we can refer back to it. And I think that last presentation, we might need to refer back to that a while, or a couple times at least. So just bear with us. It might take us a couple weeks, but we will get the presentation, all the presentations here recorded, then kind of parsed out so that you can quickly access them to review if you need to, or in case somebody in your department missed it. Well, with that, we ended just about on time. Actually, my computer is a little faster. We are right on time. Excellent job for that. I will go ahead and stop the recording.